Krishna Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhakti Vedanta Swamini Tanamani Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Kutarani Devasesha Samyavari Paschatya Desita. Om Agyanatamirandasya Jana Jana Salakaya Saksasamitanjena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namah. Mansakopatuvascha Kripasinduvevacha Petitnam Papanebhyo Vaishnava. So Mahaprabhu is just about to begin his preaching tour of South India. He's told the devotees that his desire is to find Vishwarupa, his older brother who had taken sannyas. And he had wandered off from Navadip. And he wanted to go alone and perform austerities. And he actually wanted to preach. He wanted to preach. Why does someone want to preach? Why does someone want to spread Krishna consciousness? But not theoretical answer.
Compassion.
Okay, what do you mean?
Sincere desire for the well wishes of people who are suffering.
Okay, what do you need for that?
Spiritual realization.
You have to have a proper spiritual perspective.
Yeah.
And there's a philosophical element of that. And then there's the realized element of it. And what's the difficulty in preaching, according to your understanding?
My understanding is people are comfortable in their own situations
and we are also comfortable in our own situations.
That's also true.
Anyway. And on the other hand, there was Srila Prabhupada. He was really, on the other hand, he really wanted to spread Krishna consciousness. There was the compassion element, there was the realization element, and there, as we shall hear soon, there's the empowered element, but also there's the order element. So he was doing it because I heard him say this when I was listening to a conversation this morning. He said that his Kurum Raj had ordered him or requested him, but the request, what's the difference between a request and an order? One is, you could say, more polite, and the other one is you do it. But for on this level, there's no difference. The request is an order. I'd like you to do it. Well, that's as good as an order. So he said that because my spiritual master ordered me to he didn't say preach, but I can't remember the exact word that he said, but he didn't say repeat, but to teach perhaps whatever he had heard from his spiritual master. And he was, Prabhupada at that time was explaining the principle of Guru Parampara, going all the way back ultimately to Krishna himself. As it is, no interpolations. Of course, it has to come through one's own realization and one's own intelligence too, and according to the time, place, and circumstances one speaks. But it was the order that Prabhupada would point to, the order of his spiritual master to preach in the English language, to teach others what he had heard from his spiritual master, and of course read from his spiritual master's books and the acharyas. And Prabhupada was so serious about it. He was so fired up that at the age of, how old did he leave Vrindavan? to come to the West. He was on the border of his 70th birthday, so it's a hard age to begin something of course he didn't know it was going to turn into such a huge institution. But it's a hard age to just begin something. It's a time when usually someone retires from all one's activities and just focuses on his own spiritual life. But Prabhupada's preaching was his bhajan, it was his worship, it was his offering. And he was so inspired, what we would say in ISKCON language, fired up. He was so inspired that he inspired, his inspiration inspired so many other people. But he was really inspired, and especially when he saw that Krishna was reciprocating with him. In other words, he said, in what I heard this morning, that he knew he would be successful because he was following the order of his spiritual master, and he was humbly transmitting the knowledge that he had gotten from the Srimad Bhagavatam, from the Bhagavad Gita, from Caitanya Caritamrta, through his spiritual master, through Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. He said he would, at this time, other times he said other things, but this time he said, I was sure that I was going to be successful. Because he had the backing of Krishna behind him. But when one walks out into the unknown in that way, the unknown, stepping off the ship, and as Prabhupada said, I did not know whether to turn left or right. He didn't know anyone, and everyone knows how many rupees he had with him. And we mentioned last, how many?
40 rupees.
40 rupees. In those days it was worth a lot more, but it wasn't worth very much in the West. But he did it. And Krishna reciprocated with him in a way that he and no one else could have predicted, practically speaking, exactly how he did it. And when I heard Prabhupada speaking about it this morning, he was speaking to, it was in Baltimore, Maryland. Prabhupada was staying in Washington, D.C. at that time, after the Rath Yatra in 1976, and he was meeting with the devotee scientists, Rup Damaraj, Sarapurapur, and Damara at that time, Prabhu, and he hadn't yet taken sannyas, and then with Sarapura and perhaps other devotees, and scientists, PhD scientists, and Prabhupada was just, he was in his preaching mood about the rascal scientists, and he was really saying some terrible things about them. But why? He wasn't against science, he wasn't against scientists, but in another conversation he explained why he would speak so strongly against them. He spoke so strongly against them is because of their arrogance, because of their inductive method, saying that there's no God, basically, proving, according to them, there is no God. And as a result of that, since science is so much the Brahminical leaders of society, so strongly polluting the society with atheism. And what's the result of atheism? Well, one result is, soon as there is no Supreme Lord, no God, no Krishna to answer to, soon as then there's automatically not automatically, but then there's no soul, and there's no reincarnation, there's no transmigration, there's no karma, and there's no result of anything you do. That means you can decide what's good and what's bad. Wow. And the result of that when there's no authority, external authority, absolute reference point. Imagine everyone, not imagine, it's still going to get worse, but you can see it now. It's everyone deciding what's right and what's wrong by themselves. So this is a very dangerous, precarious situation. And Prabhupada was speaking how many years ago from now? Without taking out your mobile phone, see if you can figure it out.
47.
Huh?
47.
And 47 plus 76 is?
123.
There we go. And it didn't seem so obvious the way things were going at that time, at least to the people Prabhupada was speaking to. But now it's even more obvious, the things that he was saying those years ago. How many? 47 years ago. How things have deteriorated so much. The morality, the anxiety, the unreliability, the non-trust of leaders. But what has increased? So everyone's anxiety has increased, people's insecurity has increased, but what else has increased?
Loneliness.
Huh?
Loneliness.
Loneliness. I was thinking on the positive side.
More open-mindedness and looking for alternate solutions.
Yeah, because of frustration.
Yeah.
But I was thinking of technology. Technology has increased. So now we are satisfied because we can have our, you know what. It reminded me of something that Prabhupada had said when he said that in one village in India there was no water and there was no food. And the people complained to the local magistrate, "Sir, we have no water and no food." And what did the magistrate say? "Don't worry, next week we'll have television." You have television to distract you from the fact that you have no water and no food and no electricity to run the television either. So, speaking about it in this light, it's obvious that there should be some shift and change, but it needs something more than being obvious that there should be a shift and change for there to be proper preaching, and that is that Krishna consciousness will really make a difference to people. So that comes by realization, and realization comes by what? Of course you know. What does realization come from?
Practice.
Sadhana. What else?
Grace.
Grace, mercy, association, hearing, chanting.
Desire.
Yeah, unless one has a desire, one doesn't do sadhana. Or urgency, and that's another thing that distracts people from their sadhana. There's very little sense of urgency because distracted by so many other elements of life. So those elements of life and the distractions cover the fact that it is actually urgent for ourselves and the world that we advance in Krishna consciousness. First ourselves, perhaps, and then help others. And if we have the desire and we have a feeling of urgency, somehow or another we'll be able to do it. If we don't have the desire, which is dependent somewhat on the sense of urgency, even if we have the facility, we won't do it. So Mahaprabhu desired, out of his causeless mercy, he desired to go to South India. So he went off and exhibited the basic principle of a spiritual being, the basic principle of a spiritual being's living in the material atmosphere. Do you know what I'm going to say next? Is anyone a good enough mind reader? What is that basic principle? Okay, you look like you're ready to try a mind reading.
The fish out of water?
Uh-huh.
The fish out of water analogy?
No, I'm shaking my head yes, I'm thinking no, so I might as well just say it. He went and he chanted, almost like a mad lion. And now this is going to describe, and in fact these chapters, especially this first chapter, chapter 7, which begins Mahaprabhu's tour of South India, his preaching tour, will describe his preaching methodology and how he dealt with people. And this first few verses and the section that Krishna willingly shall read today describes a good portion of it. Almost mad like a lion, Matta Singha Praya. Praya means almost. Singha means lion, and Matta means with the madness of almost like with the madness of a lion, a mad lion. Lord Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu went on his tour filled with ecstatic love and performing Sankirtan, chanting Krishna's names as follows. So anything strike you in that one verse? Yes, Nikunj. You look like you're wonderstruck. I'll read it again. Might make it easier. Almost like a mad lion, Lord Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu went on his tour, filled with ecstatic love and performing Sankirtan, chanting Krishna's names as follows. So this is the preamble, prior to the name, the mantra he was chanting. Anything strike you about one of the essential principles that Mahaprabhu was an essential ingredient in his preaching? Although that was one.
Absorption.
Excuse me?
Absorption.
Yes, but it didn't directly mention absorption, but it mentioned the result of his absorption. And it was?
Mad lion.
Huh? I knew you'd remember that. That's catchy, yeah, mad lion. What do you think the metaphor of a mad lion refers to?
Yes.
What's a mad lion?
Yeah.
What would be an example of a mad lion in action? What is this?
I think it's expressing the fire of his mood.
What would be an example of a lion who's mad?
Unstoppable.
Huh?
Unstoppable.
Okay, the visual example, what's he doing?
Roaring.
He's roaring, but he's doing something. He's on his way. He's like after his prey or something like that. You can't stop him. You know, he's focused on one thing, this antelope or something like that, and he's hungry. He wants it. He'll get it. He's going and he's roaring and he's running towards it. And he's completely absorbed and completely focused. And he was filled with ecstatic love. That was the point. And it takes focus to be filled with ecstatic love. It takes more than focus, but it takes focus to be filled with ecstatic love. And if sometimes we wonder why we're not filled with ecstatic love, we should think about the point of focus and absorption. Because what are we absorbed in? We're absorbed in tens and tens. I can't speak for you all, but for myself, so many things. It's like a light in the form of a razor with the focus of a laser can cut through metal, but it can also just diffuse itself and not give anything else but light, which is important, because if all the lights had lasers, we might be in trouble right now if they were that focused. You can't even look at them. So he was focused, completely absorbed in chanting, and completely, of course, pure, because he was Radha Krishna Nayana. And he was filled with ecstasy. And this is one of the keys of being a successful preacher. That you have to be filled with ecstasy of love for Krishna. It's really simple. And Prabhupada, when he would say, he would chant Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari before the class, and he would be fully absorbed, and he would be not exactly in the world usually, and sometimes he actually went into ecstasy, not visibly so many times, but sometimes. And then, because he was on the platform of the positive, from the platform of the positive ecstasy, the positive experience of what reality is, the positive experience of love for Krishna, therefore he could speak so strongly and negatively about everything in the material realm. And sometimes he would be speaking to people who were educated and scholars and PhDs and university professors or scientists or this and that, and sometimes he would call them demons right there, and rascals, but because there was and he would interrupt them. If you listen to his room conversations, sometimes he would interrupt them, sometimes he would let people speak, sometimes he would just keep pushing his point like an acharya sitting on a seat with people who have no concept of how to deal with an acharya. But people generally didn't get disturbed by it because he was living in the land of the positive. And his own experience of reality forced people generally to question the illusory concepts that they were holding on to so tightly. So ecstasy is very important in Krishna consciousness. And he was chanting the names. Now we're going to get to another principle. So this is the names he was chanting. Krishna, 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 hey. Krishna, 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 hey. Krishna, 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 Rakshamam. Krishna, 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 Pahimam. Rama, Raghava, Rama, Raghava, Rama, Raghava, Rakshamam. Krishna Kesava, Krishna Kesava, Krishna Kesava Pahimam. That was the Sanskrit, and here's the translation. Krishna, 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 Hey. Krishna, 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 Hey. Krishna, 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 Rakshamam. Krishna, 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 Pahimam. That is, Prabhupada says, O Lord Krishna, please protect me and maintain me. He also chanted Rama Raghava Rama Raghava Rama Raghava Rakshamam. Krishna Kesava, Krishna Kesava, Krishna Kesava Pahimam. That is, O Lord Ram, descendant of King Raghu, please protect me. O Krishna, O Kesava, killer of the Kesi demon, please maintain me. Chanting this verse ecstatically, basically chanting the names of Krishna and calling out to Krishna in ecstasy, please protect me. Pahimam, please save me. Protect me, maintain me in ecstasy. Chanting as he walked down the roads. Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu, known as Gaura Hari, Ace Loka Paripate Chalila Gaura Hari, Loka Deki Pate Kahe. When the people saw him on the path, Bala, they also chanted Hari Hari. Excuse me. Chanting this verse, Lord Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu, known as Gaura Hari, went on his way. As soon as he saw someone, he would request him to chant Hari Hari. Please chant. Now, what do you get from these verses? What goes through your mind?
Thanks, start of the Sankirtan.
Huh?
The beginning of the Sankirtan.
Thank you. Anyone else? What goes through your mind?
Although the pure devotees don't ask Krishna for this and that, just general things, but I think when he says Rakshamam, protect me, and Bahima, maintain me, I think he's referring to in obviously his spiritual life.
But in all respects, he's depending, and here's the point, he's depending on Krishna for everything. Because when you're traveling in that way, after all, he had someone with him to carry his water pot and his extra pair of clothes. But he didn't have anything else with him, nor did he make reservations with Airbnb for where is he going to spend the next night or anything like that. And one doesn't know when one is walking down the road what's going to happen. You're walking. One has no idea what's going to happen, where your food's going to come from, where your resting is going to come from, your place to sleep, where your protection is to come from, who you're going to meet. You have to deal with everything and everyone who comes on your path. Now, what do you rely on for your safety, for your life, to maintain your own life? Usually we rely on, I won't tell the same jokes again about the credit cards and the mobile phones, etc., that we bring with us. But usually we rely on our intelligence, our influence, the people that we know, our financial backing. But this concept is completely different It's a reliance on Krishna while you're in Krishna's service. In this way, you find out if it's real or not. In this way, you find out what you really want to know. Is Krishna going to protect me at the time of death? When all those things that we depend on, practically speaking, have no relevance anyway, which is one of the most frightening things about the time of death, is because the things that we usually are depending on, our physical strength, our intelligence, the people that we know, they all are taken away. When you're 15, you're not supposed to listen to these things. You're supposed to just think of life ahead of me and be strong. I'm going to do something wonderful for Krishna. So you have to sit like this. Yeah. So when one is older, and of course, when one's young, if one's ready for it, one starts immediately developing the faith that Krishna is really there and he's going to protect me by going through life in service. Again and again and again, because the rascal mind will always doubt. Not always doubt, but that's the job of, actually not, is the intelligence. Intelligence job is to doubt. It's one of the functions of intelligence. In service, going on and depending on Krishna, and yes, for sure, maintaining spiritual consciousness, but in every way, depending on Krishna. And in that mood, that absorption in depending on Krishna, then one will become ecstatic when one chants. And everyone he met, he said, he requested him, Bale Hari Hari, chant Hari Hari. Whoever heard Lord Caitanya Mahaprabhu chant Hari Hari, they also chanted the holy name of Lord Hari and Krishna. In this way, they all followed the Lord, very eager to see him. Satrisha, a thirst to see him. And after some time, the Lord would embrace these people. They would follow him. He'd be on the road, ecstatic. They would follow him. And after some time, after they followed him for some time, he would embrace these people and bid them return home, having invested each of them with spiritual potency. I'll read the purport here in a moment. Each of these empowered persons would return to his own village, always chanting the holy name of Krishna, and sometimes laughing, crying, and dancing. Such an empowered person would request everyone and anyone, whomever he saw, to chant the holy name of Krishna. In this way, all the villagers would also become devotees of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. I'll read this two short purports. Please listen, because I'm going to give you an examination right after. I'm going to ask you that question. You know what the question is? Do you remember anything? That very difficult question. There's only one question more difficult, not one, but there's many, but more difficult. Do you remember anything from yesterday? That's even more difficult. Okay, you ready? In his Amrita Pravaha Bhasya, Srila Bhakti Vinod Thakur explained that this spiritual potency is the essence of the pleasure potency and the knowledge potency. That means Ananda and Chit. By these two potencies, this is the Chit Shakti, is knowledge and ecstatic devotional service. By these two potencies, one is empowered with devotional service. Lord Krishna himself, or his representative, the unalloyed devotee, can mercifully bestow these combined potencies upon any man, any person. Being thus endowed with such potencies, one can become an unalloyed devotee of the Lord. Anyone favored by Lord Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu was empowered with this bhakti shakti. Thus the Lord's followers were able to preach Krishna consciousness by divine grace. And the second purport even shorter. In order to become an empowered preacher, one must be favored by Lord Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu or his devotee, the spiritual master. One may also request everyone to chant the Mahamantra. One must also request everyone to chant the Mahamantra. In this way, such a person can convert others to Vaishnavism, showing them how to become pure devotees of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Okay, what do you remember? Or what inspired you, or anything touched you?
I think what struck her was the importance of association, and specifically association with pure devotees, because that's the path of mercy, so to speak.
Thank you. Anything else?
That was the most important one for me.
Okay, what were the rest? The less important ones?
I just focused on that.
Very good. Anyone else? Ritika? I caught you, sorry. That was not fair, a little bit.
For me it was, I think similar to what he said, that the empowerment that you get from Caitanya Mahaprabhu to preach anyone about the Supreme Personality of Godhead, because without that, like personally in my experience, it's not easy. The doubts flood your mind all the time.
Doubts flood your mind.
My mind.
Yeah, that's what
Yeah.
So what is the empowerment? What two potencies are there?
Chit Shakti.
Yeah, Chit Shakti, which is the knowledge and bliss. So if you have knowledge, the potency of knowledge, then you won't have those doubts. You'll have realization. And if you have Ananda, even if it's not full Sattvika Bhavs, Premananda, still the happiness that one's experiencing will also impress upon people's hearts. They'll make their presence in people's hearts. They pierce through the mind and enter the people's hearts, along with the full conviction born of knowledge. Anyone else remember anything? Or inspired by something? Would you like to say anything? No. Baba?
Small sloka, apani achar jivara sikhaya. So Mahaprabhu is very much showing that.
By his example, by his practice, he was doing what he wanted, his teaching. Yes.
The mercy of the Guru is also required.
Unalloyed, pure soul. Like to say?
What answer of your first question from this purport, that how can you preach with the Bhakti Shakti help? That's how you can preach.
Yeah, that was the missing ingredient that we didn't talk about. And where does that comes from? Someone, old Prabhupada just said, being thus endowed with such potencies, one can become an unalloyed devotee of the Lord. So that's an interesting sentence, what's interesting about it? To you? Hasanam, anything interesting about you? To you about
I
that?
just think it's an unusual combination.
In what sense?
Knowledge and pleasure.
Huh?
Knowledge and pleasure being an unusual combination.
Not on the spiritual platform, yeah.
It was interesting that it said if you're endowed with those two potencies,
Yeah.
you can become unaware of the Lord. Means
Yeah.
there's still a process. I'm not saying it's guaranteed, but that you can become.
Yeah.
I don't know which is the cause and which is the effect.
Exactly. Because you think, anyway, I'm not endowed with the potency, so what can I do? Might as well take a little. You know, if I do that too many times, everyone will fall asleep. Yeah, but it's a sincere attempt, sort of like putting your feet into the waters of service, preaching service, etc. By doing it, even though you're not endowed, then Krishna or his representative sees the sincerity of the attempt, even though you're not yet realized, even though you're not yet pure. But then, if he so desires, you get some spiritual energy, and then it's easier when you have knowledge and bliss to be an unalloyed devotee. And what an empowered devotee can do is certainly a lot more than what one who's serving can do. But remember what we spoke about right in the beginning? What was the point that Prabhupada referred to, why he went to the West? It was because he was ordered by his spiritual master. So because he took that order so seriously, not as a request, could you do this? You know, yeah, well, I'll put it on my list. Because he took it seriously, I'm going to do this, even though there was quite a long time gap between the request and the fulfillment of the request, but he took it so seriously with full absorption, and he was prepared with that energy when he went, and still for the first months and months and months and months you know, things didn't just immediately manifest like that. It was months and months and months and months, and it didn't start for almost a year, practically speaking. For a year. And it started with just a bunch of unqualified people, completely unqualified, but they sincerely were influenced by his purity. They were influenced by his purity, by his association, by the chanting, and that changed their consciousness. Anyone else want to say anything on these points?
I have a question, so I don't know if I should leave it till the end or ask.
Let's get up, see where. Let me just read a little more, and then we'll ask you to ask a question. People from different villages who came to see such an empowered individual would become like him simply by seeing him and receiving the mercy of his glance. When each of these newly empowered individuals returned to his own village, he also converted the villagers into devotees. And when others came from different villages to see him, they were also converted. In this way, as empowered men went from one village to another, all the people of South India became devotees. Thus many hundreds of people became Vaishnavas when they passed the Lord on the way, and were embraced by him. In whatever village Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu stayed to accept alms, begging prasadam, many people came to see him. By the mercy of the Supreme Lord, Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu, all these persons became first-class devotees. Later they became teachers or spiritual masters and liberated the entire world. It says, Hari Tarila Jagat, the whole world, liberated the whole world. In this way, the Lord went to the extreme southern part of India and he converted all the provinces to Vaishnavism. Lord Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu did not manifest his spiritual potencies in Navadip, but he did manifest them in South India and delivered all the people there. So he was exhibiting the full range of Shakti in preaching when he toured South India. Okay, yes.
So in the past few verses, there's this term that's come up again with, in line with, endowed with the mercy and the knowledge of the and one becomes a pure devotee. But this term, pure devotee, sometimes feels very subjective to the person interacting.
To the person interacting?
Like if I'm interacting with someone, I may feel they're a pure devotee because of my experiences and conditioning. So like, how does one define that pure devotee, keeping aside all the blinkers that we might have in our lives?
Or subjective viewpoints.
Yeah.
So there's two verses one from Shastra and one from that Srila Rupa Goswami composed himself that defines what pure devotional service is. So a pure devotee is one who is practicing pure devotional service. So the first is Anya Abhilasi Jatsanyam Jnana Kamara Navrita Anukulena Krishna Anushivadam Bhakti Uttamam. The other one is Rishikena Rishikesa Sevanam Bhakti Uchate. The second one means when all the senses are employed in the service of Krishna. That's called bhakti. And the first one is Rupa Goswami's definition, which there are many long commentaries on this by Srila Jiva Goswami and by Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, and of course that verse is included in Caitanya Caritamrta. It's from Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu and explained in the Nectar of Devotion. But it basically means Anya Abhilasita Sunyam, when all external desires other than service to Krishna become sunya, zero. Anya Abhilasita Sunyam Jnana Kama Anavritam, and there's no desire. You're doing something and you're not desiring to get any knowledge that leads to liberation. It's not your desire to get liberated from material existence, or jnana karma, or desire for karma work to get some result. So you're serving, but you're not desiring to get from that service either liberation or some type of result, sense enjoyment. So Anukulain, and you're serving in the mood, Krishna Shilanam, you're cultivating love for Krishna in a favorable mood, because one could be focused on Krishna, and the example is given of Kamsa. He's focused on Krishna, but his mood is pratikul, against Krishna, but rather the cultivation is anukul, or favorable to Krishna, based on trying to please Krishna rather than being inimical to Krishna. Anukulena Krishna Anushilanam. Anushilanam means cultivation. You're cultivating Krishna consciousness in this way, with those elements. That's called bhakti, pure bhakti. Now, also, which we don't usually speak about, there's 3 levels of devotional service. One is kanista, beginner. Second is madhyam, and the third is uttama. So kanista, the beginner, is up to the level of anartana vritti, when you're removing all the anartas. Then when you become fixed in devotional service, up to, oh no, I've got it wrong, up to, I can't remember exactly now. But bhava bhakti is considered madhyam. Up to the, and then uttama bhakti is prema. Usually, because in bhava bhakti, it's when you gain the shelter of the internal energy. You know who you are eternally in relationship to Krishna, but you're not yet on the level of prema. So this is how Rupa Goswami describes it. So pure devotional service can be practiced on all 3 levels, even on the kanista level, if you're sincerely in that mood of Anya Bilasita Sanyam Gana Kamar Navrita Anukulena Krishna Anushilanam. If you're in that mood, even though you may be a beginner, it's still considered pure devotional service. So there's different levels of being a pure devotee. And Srila Jiva Goswami describes that if the opposite of pure devotional service is mixed devotional service. So if there's mixtures of jnana, desire for liberation, knowledge leading to liberation, and karma, I'm doing it but I get some percentage for myself. If you perform misra bhakti, devotional service that's mixed with other desires, then that won't lead to bhava bhakti. So first, before real advancement is made, one really has to be acting in devotional service just to please Krishna. Now what do you think about that? So that's what pure the pure devotee has, that, and it could be on different levels. What do you think?
It gave me a better understanding of pure devotional service. Yeah.
Yes.
My question is with regards to preaching. Just a few days ago, some of us were having a discussion about who we should preach to and who we, in some cases that may come across as arrogant, as establishing our path as a superior. And also, I have a foggy recollection of somewhere in the Bhagavad Gita where Krishna says those who are on their individual paths, we shouldn't disturb them and let them follow their paths. So, we are encouraged to preach to others, but how do we be selective and not so arrogant in our approach?
Well, how do we not be arrogant? Just look in the mirror. What do you think about that answer to that one?
Preach to ourselves first.
Oh, just understand that you're just doing it you're doing it on order, on the servant, and for purification. And of all the people that may criticize you, you know even more than them about you. That they could be criticizing you for if they know everything, so to speak. Or the easiest way to understand that point is just imagine if you had a loudspeaker hooked up from your mind to the world. what it's like inside. Just wait a moment. So how to not be arrogant? The more the material consciousness will automatically be arrogant because it's based on false ego. And the second part was, how do we preach, help people or preach without being arrogant, thinking we're better than everyone else?
Right.
Or, so there, even though that actually will create humility if we understand that our path is so full of mercy, and yet I'm so unfortunate that I take to it just partially according to how much I feel like it on the day. And then, should we preach to people? Should we give people transcendental knowledge? And does that conflict with disturbing them?
Yeah, and there are parts like what Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita.
Yeah. So that takes some discrimination.
Right.
In other words, or giving people prasadam and the holy names doesn't disturb anyone.
Right.
So, and then if they're interested, then philosophy comes later.
Right.
That being said, is the reason for that is if someone's on a proper path, but it may not, a religious spiritual path.
Yeah.
And if you poke too many holes in that path, they may give that up and not accept your path, and then be worse off. That's the point.
Yeah.
So that's the point.
Yeah.
But yet, there's some discrimination involved, because someone could be on what they think is a spiritual path, like you can do anything you want, because everything is illusion anyway. And, so... Yeah. I think
You covered most of the points, Guru Maharaj. One thing that I've seen from my experience when I was quite younger, that I could, and this happened once, few times in the city, there was some Christian judge ladies walking around the street and just shouting and yelling, if you don't follow Jesus.
Just shouting and yelling at everyone?
Yeah, just
indiscriminately shouting and yelling at everyone.
At everyone, that if you don't follow Jesus, you're doomed for hell, and it was very fanatic kind of approach. Not that we Hare Krishnas go to that level of extreme, but when we do preach, and that's where the false ego comes, that because I'm following this path, that must be superior.
Yes.
Because I'm superior, that's why the path that I'm following is superior. And so often I can say for myself that made some kind of mistakes like that, but with the preaching, it is so interesting and exciting, because there is no one size fit all. It depends upon the receptivity of the other person, on what journey they are, and you can only know that once you know that person personally. Otherwise, we can just play the Srila Prabhupada's recording, where he's saying everyone is demon and dogs and rascals and everything. So, but we can't just limit it.
Prabhupada didn't do that when he was dealing with individuals. He also saw the person's sincerity.
And often what I found was that there are more similarities in different paths and different religions than differences. There are differences, but there are also similarities.
Yes.
So if you
and sometimes the similarities or the differences are so huge that there's almost no room for similarities. And sometimes Prabhupada would also just push the point on the difference, because the difference, such as specifically meat eating, he would always talk to Christians about meat eating, because it's such a horrendous thing, slaughterhouses, such and so sinful, and your heart has to be so hard. That hard means covered, unnaturally covered. So sometimes he would speak on that level to people because they needed, because he wasn't fulfilling his role of speaking the truth.
People pleaser.
But we and he
Are very
are
different.
the same. Or at least he and I. But on the other hand, sometimes if you're being harassed by these people, sometimes you can just pull out that shotgun, so to speak. There's one in Canada, this was many, many years ago, one Mataji was on a book distribution party, and they were distributing Bhagavad Gitas or something. And they distributed to an elderly Christian lady. And she thought it was a Bible. I don't know what the devotees said, but she got the impression it was a Bible. So she got it, and then she complained to the police that they're making believe they're Christians and they're giving out these other books. So the police came and they brought their party to the police station. And there was one of the young ladies was very intelligent. Not that they all weren't, but one was especially. So they asked her to speak on their behalf. So the old lady was there, and they were standing in front of the chief of police. And the chief of police said, she said that you're claiming to be Christians. Would you do that? Are you doing that? And the very intelligent young lady said, Christians are allowed to eat, or they eat meat, they drink alcohol, they have illicit sex, and they take intoxication and gamble. We don't eat meat, we don't gamble, we don't have illicit sex, we don't take intoxication, and we don't gamble. We would never imitate Christians. And the judge just looked at her, and then looked at the old lady, and said, "That's the best put down I ever heard." Anyway, that's what we are. So there is a lot you could say, in common, but also Krishna consciousness has specialities on the positive side. The chanting of the holy names, the emphasis on the holy names, the emphasis on this type of purity, and what to speak of who is God. And what's it like in heaven, the spiritual world? And how can you love that Supreme Lord and the intimacy of relationship that's possible with that absolute truth, with God, with the Supreme Personality of God? And these things are absent. So there are similarities, there are differences. So it depends who you're talking to and who they are, etc. I know that our university professor, Radhika Raman, there was one lecture of his I heard, and he said, in dealing with in interreligious dialogue on the university level, he finds it's best to point out the differences first. You're establishing some boundaries, because if you just go right to what we have in common, then,
Becomes a one.
Yeah. First Mohan, you have anything to say?
I had a question.
Yes.
So before you're talking about your devotional service and how people know the different platforms, like even a neophyte can do pure devotional service.
Kunista Adhikari.
Then is that because then are they actually pure devotees if like sometimes they're more sincere and
No, it means that sincere.
their devotional service is
Sincere. It's pure. The practice is pure. That's their desire, even though they may be beginners.
So then are they considered pure devotees?
Yeah, that's what we said. This is, and I didn't make it up either. It comes from the Bhakti Samhita Sindhu. They just may not be very mature. It's a matter of taking that verse, Anyabilasita Samyam, and they're applying that. That's how they're practicing that Krishna consciousness. I don't want anything but to please Krishna. So that's a pure desire. So then the question goes, when you're looking at that person, how do you know? But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the internal consciousness of the person. Okay. Sri Caitanya Caritamrta ki jai. Sri Prabhupada ki jai. Sri Krishna Kaviraj Goswami Maharaj ki jai. Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu was traveling all over South India and preaching ki jai. Sri Prabhupada Bhakta Vrinda ki jai. Nitai Gaur Purinam Bhagavati.